Welcome to Keeping Score. I'm Rick Horrow. Each week we bring you insights from the playmakers, deal makers, and rule makers in the world of sports. I'll give you my take on some of the items of the week using my 30 years of experience doing deals for teams, leagues, and players in the $750 billion business of sports. Plus, we'll talk with a central figure in the sports world. The views expressed in this podcast are my own and do not represent the views of Reuters. Let's get started. Rick Horrow, Keeping Score in the boardroom. We're live at Election Central. Oh, wait. It's over.
Please, no more Election Central.
Now we can talk about sports. Dan Colarusso, the chief global worldwide editor of Reuters Digital. Have you slept much in the last week?
I have not slept much in the last week, and unfortunately, it has not been as much fun as it was not sleeping during the Mets' run to the World Series last year. It's been a great news cycle. The election's interesting. It's all good, but it's been an exhausting cycle for people in the political news and in the general news business, and it's been fun, but we're all tired. And you and I were talking before we came on the air. The only solace I've had, the only recreation I've had, is reading the New York Post and it's Mets and Yankees free agency handicapping in the past week, and that's been some place to hide from the political dialogue. So it's been fun, and it's a great topic, right?
I did a few segments earlier in the last few days that sports is a healing agent. We'll talk about free agency in a minute, but we talk about divisiveness in the country and all of that, and it is good to remember that sports is. Look what happened in Cleveland 4 months ago. Look what happened in Chicago 2 weeks ago. 5 million people at a parade. And let's just hope that we can seize on what unites us as opposed to what divides us, don't you think?
No, I think we should just continue to distract ourselves by hiding in pricey club seats and drinking $19 beers. I think that will make it all better.
Listen.
No, you're right. No, I don't mean to. I don't mean to demean. I don't mean to demean the healing power of sports. I do think it is, again, for us who as fans, it's a nice place to have a different conversation on social media. It's a nice thing to talk about with your friends without worrying about arguing over China stealing our jobs or whatever it might be. It is sports plays a vital role in our cultural sanity.
Well, hey, and my friend, as we said before in another context before we got on the air, it is an interesting concept to understand that the people that are listening to us who are sports fans, they're going to get it anyway. And the people that aren't, they're going to go on fighting. So that's okay.
Right,
we'll deal with that. So free agency. It's time of year, as we understand, that all of the teams, nobody is standing pat. And even the teams with the biggest payrolls are there. So what's your take? And then I'll give you my take on where free agency is and who will win and lose.
Well, it does. It doesn't seem like the hot and bothered year in free agency. Like there's not the one player that everyone's talking about. I mean, I think Cespedes is one who people would like to have around, but even he didn't get top dollar last year, and he had to come back to the Mets on some weird fragmented contract. So I think it's a free agency. It's a season of how do the teams that did really well keep their payrolls intact and keep their teams intact without busting their numbers, and how do teams that are one or two pieces away, do they make the right calls on the pieces they keep? I mean, if we talk about the Yankees and all this young talent emerging, do the Yankees feel like they're going to make a move now, or do the Yankees wait till midseason and see how the young talent's evolved and make a midseason trade? The Mets, this is just New York, they are stacked with power-hitting outfielders. So there's a great calibration that starts now and goes all the way through the general managers' meetings, and it's fun in the hot stove league, and it is part of the downtime that keeps us interested. And I do think that you look at the Cubs, you look at teams that spent big who failed, the Padres, the Braves in previous seasons, the Marlins. Who's going to be that team this year? Who's going to make the splash this year? Spend more money than you think they would ever have, and crap out once the season starts.
And if you look at values from another source, but everybody kind of understands what the bottom ones are: the Rays, the Marlins, the A's, the Rockies, the Royals, for example, the Indians. They're in the bottom. The payrolls are in the bottom. But when you look at the Royals and the Indians, it just shows you that you'd rather have money, but you don't need money. You need brains. And so part of the deal is, how do you keep, as you just said, the guys who you want to keep? The Blue Jays look to try to figure out how to deal with Encarnacion and Bautista. The Cubs, Chapman and Fowler. And if Chapman leaves, then Mark Melanson may be the guy. It's ironic that the Cubs are now looking to retool for a dynasty.
Yeah, let's switch back to Toronto, though. I mean, the Cubs are interesting, and we should talk more about them. But Toronto, their ownership, their executive level, they've made great strides in the past few years, right? I mean, they're a team that is looking to be consistent and consistently good, and they've made trades, and they gave away some of their farm hands. But how do you see that team shaping up? Do you see that team as being able to keep it intact or absorbing a loss and having something down on the farm to make up for it?
They need pitching, and so they'll win games, but they'll win games 11-9. They also have this tremendous responsibility, Dan, because they're not just Toronto's team. They're Vancouver's team as well. They're Canada's team, and they're
right.
22nd in overall value, and it's about $900 million. They've got Rogers, and they've got the big building behind them. But they better make some good moves, because when you look up there at the World Cup of Hockey that I was at last month, and the Blue Jays were in the middle of winning their 7 straight to get into the playoffs, and then they got into the next round, and believe it or not, they forced the Maple Leafs off the front page, which is unbelievable. But they
I didn't think it was. I thought there was a wait. There's a law in Canada about that, right?
But
you can't take the Maple Leafs.
That law only starts at the end of September. They waived it a little bit this year because of the World Cup of Hockey. But there is a law that as soon as the puck drops, nothing else is covered. You're absolutely right.
Let's talk asset allocation. And from what you talk to sports executives all the time. How do you allocate money towards pitching as opposed to position players? If you're Toronto, do you try the Indians model and go with some good, strong young arms, or do you go out in the market and take Bartolo Colon to eat some innings, and then pick up a bigger, younger, harder throwing name to kind of be your ace? Do you spend more on pitching because free agency is the quickest way to get it?
You get me one general manager that talks about the old Atlanta Braves model, where you put together the poor, Glavine and all of those guys, the pitchers of the century, and they win, 13 straight division titles. And I'll find you a general manager that talks about the Phillies. You remember Oswalt and Lee and all of those guys were supposed to be not miss. Well, guess what? They missed. And if you miss at 4 pitchers at $25 million, that's half your payroll. So that's an issue where you frankly want to try to mix them up. The way the Cubs are doing it is they had a guy like Arrieta and Hendricks, who, for example, weren't the guys that were the big value guys. They will be now, and they'll continue. Their next contract's huge. But then you mix them with Lester and Lackey, and both of those guys are proven guys. So, and by the way, the bullpens now, it's ironic that there wasn't one starting pitcher in the World Series this year in any game that went past the 6th inning. It was the first time in history. So what does that mean? That means more one-inning guys, and your bullpens are more important.
Right. I would love, honestly, Rick, I think you or I, had we come up in this time, we could have been a great bottom of the 5th inning righty specialist.
Yeah, because it only takes like 2 pitches. So
you just need exactly.
You could pitch to the even guys, and I would pitch to the lower guys. I've got a grandkid now, and what I'm doing with that child, although he can't hold it yet, is stick the baseball in the left hand. I know it doesn't work for Marinovich on the football side, but I'm going to try it.
Oh, I have a lefty at home too. She's gonna take the world by storm. But let's go back to the Cubs now. You're sitting there. You're Chicago. You've broken the curse. What do you do now? What have you done for Chicago lately?
Well, here's what they've got to do quickly is deal with, meaning sign or not sign, Dexter Fowler, and he could wind up replacing Cespedes in New York if he leaves. Although Dexter Fowler stayed for an extra year to get the championship, does that mean he wants a long-term deal to remain with the guys that he loves? Or does it now mean I've got the leverage now, so here I go?
And where does he fit? And where the fit is interesting. Like you talk about New York, but I look at New York and I see a Juan Lagares, and I say he's redundant with Fowler. Or Fowler's redundant with him. Like you need a different bat. You don't need another outfielder who's in the middle of the pack. And Fowler, quite frankly, big game player, but over a season, traditionally, historically, a middle of the pack guy.
Middle of the pack guy. But right place, right time, because as we said, he and Chapman are the 2 guys that people remember in Chicago breaking the curse after 108 years who are free agents.
Right.
So like it or not, he's middle-of-pack guy, but at the head of the pack contract. And then, the Cubs, and by the way, the free agent impact ripples with non-free agents. So Jason Hayward has a 8-year contract. He was terrible this year. Do you find someone to take his remainder of the contract or have the Cubs kind of help pay, and that opens up a outfield spot for the Cubs? I don't know. We'll see. And that Schwarber is an amazing guy. The Cubs have an embarrassment of riches, but they've got to figure out their their closer deal, having Chapman pitch, 8 outs, 9 outs, a managerial mistake in my mind, leaving him in the bottom of the ninth after a tie game, and the guy gritted it out and made Madden look good. But now what happens? Does he leave and go somewhere and they replace him with Mark Melancon, who would be the guy probably to come in? The Cubs have leverage because they have the dollars, and you see how important a closer is. They had this guy Rondon, who was in the middle of the pack this year and didn't do anything. Wrong. He wasn't given a chance to do anything because they found Chapman, and the Yankees are great because they spawned two guys between he and Miller who were the World Series heroes. Unfortunately, not for the Yankees.
Right, but so you're the Cubs, and we talked asset allocation. I said asset allocation before, but now let's look at short and long-term holdings. Like you look at Lester and Lackey, and even Arrieta's a little long in the tooth. Do you say we'll trade Schwarber and keep some powder dry for a pitcher? For a young pitcher, for a young gun next year, who's ever coming out? Is it Matt Harvey next year? Is it someone else? Do you say we have enough position players, as if you can ever have enough, but we have enough position players, and the Cubs' core is a lot younger across the board than its pitching staff?
Well, it's a good series of questions. I will tell you, being in Chicago a lot in the last few weeks, that if Schwarber gets traded, I think that's one thing that all of the protesters who are trying to rip out the country today can agree on. They'll head to Wrigley Field. They'll tear the place apart.
You can't trade Schwarber.
They ain't going to do that.
I'm a diehard Mets fan, and when Schwarber gets up, I'm on the edge of the couch.
I know.
That guy's such a great baseball player.
The problem is you're asking a Cub fan what to do to ruin a team, and you're a Mets fan. So no, I'm not telling you.
But again, let's just take a second and talk about chemistry. The 1986 Mets traded Kevin Mitchell, who was a good player, had a good year, but was seen as a guy who might have been a little bit of a problem in the clubhouse, for Kevin McReynolds, who was a solid citizen, great player, probably had an MVP level season the year after, but it affected the chemistry of a team. Losing Schwarber would probably do that, but would losing Fowler do that? So you have this very delicate balance between throwing money at a problem and the chemistry that you need to keep intact.
Yeah, and then at what point chemistry? So Hayward is given credit for an amazing clubhouse players-only meeting during the rain delay in that iconic seventh game that may have shifted the Cubs' fortunes. I think it was the fact they could actually hit a guy. It had nothing to do with the meeting. But this is the guy who apparently was the motivator in extra innings, yet he can't hit. So he's got great chemistry. He can play great defense, but he's not able to hit. So maybe he spends a lot of time in the batting cage in the offseason. And they signed him for some reason because he used to be able to hit. So maybe it's
he's
a one-year blip.
He's an unbelievable guy.
And then we'll go on other sports.
Sure.
We can do this all night, and it's great. And that's what makes baseball great. But, baseball, just to emphasize this, had 16 years now without a repeat World Series champion, and 25 of the teams, of all of the teams, only 30 in the last 5 years, made the playoffs. 25 different teams. It's the most in baseball history. It's the most of any sport. And you know why? Because we're talking about this kind of stuff at this time of the season every year. Baseball's beautiful.
Right. It is fantastic.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, good. All right, so that's one thing. At a time in rampant disagreement, that's one thing you and I can agree on.
We can agree on Kyle Schwarber.
To go to football. You want to agree to go to football?
Once we run Schwarber for president. Yes.
Yeah, good idea. He's got the Indiana vote. He's Indiana guy, and that's they don't need that vote.
And he performs well under pressure.
Yes.
Yeah, I want to talk about, I was reading the as part of the liberal media conspiracy, I was reading the New York Times a few days ago, the sports section, and I came upon this San Diego Chargers story that the taxpayers of San Diego rejected the referendum that would have put hundreds of millions of dollars in tax revenues toward a stadium for the team. And that team has been one of the teams that's been agitating. They're going to move to, I don't know if they were one of the Vegas contenders, but they were one of the L.A. contenders. They've been making noises for years. And I think it was going to be a hotel tax. And the city kind of rebelled against them, saying, to make the place a more expensive tourist destination, is it worth it? What's not what your take is, but do the numbers add up? Do they have enough alternatives to hold San Diego hostage? Is the end game a big enough win for the owners of the Chargers?
Yes and yes. And remember, I did this for like 40 years of my life, so the choreography, it's easy to predict, so I will predict this for you right now. First of all, the referendum that was done had two dueling referendums in two different locations and funding plans, and all the opponents had to do was to say, you can decide to do one of those two, but vote no. So even if one was preferred over the other, they canceled each other out. It was about a 40% vote on one and a 41% vote on the other, which is a defeat in any context, but in the world that I used to live in, where you got these referendums passed, you needed 50% plus one. In California, because of that old Jarvis amendment, if you remember, for capital expenditures, you need 2/3. So they never, ever, ever, ever came close.
Okay.
The Chargers decided to do this as a last act of good faith with the city, and they had an understanding that between November 8 and the inevitable killing and January 15, which is the day of relocation applications, the city will, quote, try as hard as it can to put a plan together, but now they can't have a public vote again because they've already had one. So I guess the city will now try to do something, but the answer is the alternative is to share the stadium with the Rams and be part of that 50-50 partnership that everybody had talked about. The stadium's big enough, the market's big enough, Mark Davis goes to Vegas, maybe, and it may all be resolved, quite interestingly enough, in the next 3 months.
Okay, LA's a big market, but, they lost the NFL for quite a period of time before. I mean, with the money that's involved now, with the stadium rights, with whatever they can get, I mean, is LA the market to support two professional football teams? I mean, they've tried it before. It hasn't worked. What's in the Chargers' mind? I mean, why not do the deal in San Diego? You have the town to yourself, and it's a fan base that, that's been loyal over the years.
Fan base loyal, great. Stadium deal would have to come out of their own pocket. Fan base that's questionable, sharing with a beautiful new stadium an hour and a half away, cuts into your fan base, even though the one is LA and one is San Diego. And the big deal is you got to come up with $800 million to $1 billion out of your own pocket, which the Spanos family will not do, if the alternative is to go up to a stadium that they're going to pay half of in LA. And there are questions about the LA market, but that stadium's going to be beautiful.
The stadium's going to be beautiful, but it's in a town that's notoriously fickle when it comes to sports fans. And come on, are we going to collect winter coats and canned food for the Spanos family? I mean, these are private enterprises. We have a bake sale, right? Exactly, gluten-free because it's Southern California. But but NFL owners, I mean, I don't know how much more appetite there's going to be for these. I mean, and you've been doing these deals for years, but I don't know how much more appetite there's going to be to put the burden on taxpayers. And that's going to be a difficult one to hoe. And, we don't have to settle it here. Obviously, you and I don't have, you might have a direct pipeline into the Chargers. I don't. So they'll probably make the move to LA and find themselves sharing with the Rams, two equally mediocre franchises, battling it out for the scraps of LA.
When we were doing the stadium stuff around the country, it was very clear that just because you had a lot of money didn't mean that you needed to spend it as a part of a public-private partnership. So the way it worked out historically is one of the stadiums with the most public money was built in Seattle as part of a whole Washington last-ditch effort to save the Seahawks before they went down to L.A. And that stadium, which is now the loudest stadium in the league, was almost exclusively publicly financed. Who owns that team? Paul Allen. He's got a lot of money. So it's not just a question of how much you got.
Yeah, he's been known to throw a couple of shekels around. Yeah. Oh, look, okay, you win, but as someone who looks at it and from an everyday fan point of view, I don't quite see where the private part of this partnership is.
Yeah, I know.
That's the thing to me.
The private part, by the way, teams are now putting up basically a third of the money. In essence, they write a check for a third of the risk and the capital, and the public sector comes up with 2/3, which is, by the way, a lot different than it was 40 years ago. Remember those old stadiums in Philly and Cincinnati and all those places where they were public works projects? You put the baseball team and the football team in them, and they were taken out of the parks budget. Well, that's 100% public money. The difference is those were $30 million. These are $1 billion. So
right, that's the thing.
A big difference.
There's a few zeros in there, yeah. But okay, well, look, we may want to do a special on stadium financing because I got to tell you, to me, it is, especially coming up with whatever new tax regime comes in to Washington, D.C., and how that affects the local bond markets, it's a very, very interesting financial scenario, I think. And I think it's worth taking a look at because, it is a public-private thing and it is kind of a new economy.
Well, and here's the peg, and then we'll go to the basketball one, but let's remind each other to do it. The one is, if the Vegas thing happens, it's going to be because the hotel tax funds that one there. But then there are a lot of other things as to how you're going to get the financing for other stadiums down the road. And the public piece of all of this has been federal tax-exempt bonds that President Obama had said, we don't like that because that doesn't make any sense because these should be private. Well, there is a chance to revisit that, and it will be interesting to see what the president-elect says about that. It doesn't make it a deal because the difference between taxable and tax-exempt bonds at the federal level is a big deal, but not enough to decide whether to build a stadium or not. But it'll show you what his position is going to be, and then we probably ought to do a special on it. So, basketball. We've got a great guy who has a lot of different perspective on it, but what's your overall sense of the financial health of the NBA today?
I think that the NBA is headed toward an income inequality gap. I think there's money being spent. I think the biggest teams are still drawing, and there's that elite level team. And I don't know what's going to happen to the mid-level teams. I don't know how long. Even the team in Brooklyn, which is a major market. I don't know about if you'll see 16 years without a repeat champion in the NBA because I don't think teams will come up the curve that quickly. I just think that there's a major gap in quality right now in the NBA, and I think that's going to have an impact on financial concerns around the league in the next 5 to 6 years.
Well, and the guy that we'll have, and we'll talk about him too, it really was an honor to spend time with Pat Williams. In reality, little pat on the back respectively, as Pat was driving the NBA in Orlando at the same time I was trying to get the NBA in Miami. So we were allies as far as expansion was concerned, and then enemies when the NBA said we were only going to take 3. And at the end of the day, long story, won't do it to a big one, but at the end of the day, they took Charlotte, Minnesota, Miami, and Orlando because they liked bits and pieces of all of it. Miami, I would say, because of me, maybe because of Ted Arison and his money, yes. And, of course, Pat Williams was the Orlando guy, so known him for a long time. But let's remember.
He was the founding managing partner, right, or the founding GM? Or
founding GM, founding guy. And since 1968, by the way, he's been in the NBA as a GM for teams in Chicago, Atlanta, Philly, 1983 World Champion Sixers, the Magic.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Pat Williams trivia. Is he the guy who adopted 4 or 5 kids?
14.
14.
Yes. We didn't ask this, and this is why he's so special. Pat and his wife Ruth are the parents of 19 kids.
Right.
14 from 4 nations, aging from 24 to 37. And for 1 year, 16 of his kids were all teenagers at the same time. How about that?
I remember, I may still have the Sports Illustrated issue with that story about him.
Yeah.
And I remember it vividly because I thought, this is a decent human being, and he's obviously a smart guy. So I'm looking forward to hearing the interview.
Well, we'll hear it. So Pat Williams, Orlando Magic, Philadelphia 76ers, and others, and here he is now. I'm really honored to have somebody who I consider a good friend. He's been involved in sports as long as I can remember. He's been a general manager since 1968. He was involved in leading the 83 World Champion Sixers. He basically founded the Magic. There were other people involved, but he was involved as well. And with his 500 or more companies that he speaks to around the country, and his 19 children, and his 100 books that he's written, I don't even know if he has time to be on this show, so we'll speak pretty quickly. Pat Williams, how are you?
Rick, nice to hear from you, and always good to catch up with you. I appreciate the call.
Anytime. So first of all, before we even start about the Magic and about Dr. J and about the current folks in the NBA and the Sixers and the like, tell me about the book, the latest one that you've done and you're proud of.
Rick, it's called Humility, and I take the position that humility is a characteristic that we can learn. I don't think you're born with it. I think we need to be taught the importance of having a humble spirit. And I've been very fortunate in my life in sports to observe and watch and see the power of a humble spirit in a John Wooden or a Lamar Hunt, a Julius Erving, Dr. Billy Graham, and others who just have a wonderful touch and way with people because despite their position of great wealth or great power, they don't flaunt it, and they live a life of humility. So that's left a deep imprint on my life, and I've tried to pass that along in this book, that there's great power and great strength in the possession of a humble spirit. And we can all work at that, and we can all improve and become better in that department.
Certainly, we all can, and it's a book with teachings, and clearly it resonates with your experience in life and in sports. How could it not? What kind of responsibility, Pat, do you think is created by being a professional athlete in terms of giving back and doing the right thing?
Well, Rick, I think that it's part of your obligation, and I would argue with my friend Charles that athletes, yes, you are a role model. The way you act, the way that you conduct yourself, the way you handle yourself, what you say on and off the court is leaving a deep imprint. And young people and older alike are watching, and we all want, listen, Rick, we all are desperate for heroes in this country. We want heroes, and we don't have cowboys anymore. We don't have military leaders. We have coaches, and we have athletes, who really are our heroes today. Although the military are our true heroes, but I'm arguing that you get into the sports business, you're on stage, you're known, you're watched, and I argue that you've got an obligation to your many, many fans to live your life the right way, to live it properly, and entwined with that is a truly humble spirit. That's going to permeate and touch everything you do.
And I guess you could argue, regardless of the political fence you're on, that after the rhetoric of this campaign, I think America needs healing more than ever, and maybe sports can be part of that solution. What's your take on that?
Rick, I like that. I like that take. Sports is always the solution, whether it was after the tragic days of 9/11, when sports was shut down for a few days. It was at that point that I realized how important sports is to this country. Those 4 days after 9/11, the whole world stopped, and there was no sports to follow, and we had lost our sideline that keeps all of us going, whether it's college football or a major league pennant race or any of the sports. I mean, that's really what provides America with joy and rooting interest and all. It just permeates our soul as residents of this country. So to me, sports is always the solution.
You've been in the league for 957 years or longer, and if you have a magic wand that would be given to you by Adam Silver for a day, what would you change?
Oh, that's a good question. I wouldn't change anything with the rules. I think they're fine. I think the magnitude and the sweep of the game, around the world is enormous. I wouldn't change anything there. I think we've fine-tuned the rules, Rick. They're just about as perfect as we can get them. Oh, I don't know. If I could change anything, I'd bring back Mendy Rudolph.
That's great.
I bring back Jake O'Donnell. I bring back
history and tradition is what you'd bring back as well, and I think you'd probably bring back
Earl Strom. I'd give anything to see Earl make a call.
Wow.
One more time.
Let the record reflect that Pat Williams had the ability to change anything he wanted to in the NBA, and his answer was to bring back 3 referees. Well, good for you. Good for you. Hey, so the other piece of the business side of this is that the salaries are higher than you could have ever envisioned, I assume, and a lot of it is the function directly of the increased revenue share out of TV. Are we in a position now where we're at a crossroads where everything's getting so expensive, we've got to really worry about pricing the average fan out of existence, or is the league going to survive like it always has?
Well, Rick, you're right, and we've got to be very, very careful about how we price our buildings. We've got to be very careful that we don't price the normal fan out of coming to enjoy an NBA ball game. That's something that each franchise has to be alert to and wrestle with, and make sure they handle properly according to their market. But you're right, it's been a very positive sign that this kind of money is coming to the league. The TV contracts are staggering, and the players share in their portion of that. And so this past summer we saw some very, very big contracts. But we can afford them, and the players are part of that family, part of that team, and they've earned it. And so thus the price of being a basketball player has gone up. And that's good news for the players, and it'll eventually settle down again. But right now it was a good year let's put it this way, it was a good year to be a free agent.
Yeah, true, and it'll be a good year to be a free agent this year as well, as we know. Are we comfortable with the, at least I've been arguing, and hopefully a lot of other people will be, that the D-Day of December 15 to opt out of this existing agreement is just an empty date that nobody's going to worry about, and that we're going to get an extension done before Thanksgiving, and that everybody is going to be happy with labor in the future in the NBA? What's your take?
Well, Rick, all the reports are very encouraging. Obviously, and none of those discussions are open to public consumption, but all the early reports are the two parties are having good discussions, and everything that we're hearing is of a positive nature, which is really, really good news, that the players and the league can work this thing out and avoid any long-term problems. It seems to me the league is so healthy right now, and everybody is doing well, that there shouldn't be too much to quibble and argue over. That's my feel, and hopefully they can get it resolved quickly, and we can go on without all of that looming over us. We can really look forward to a long run of good harmony and good basketball.
Speaking of good basketball, are the Magic looking up from your perspective? Does it look like you're turning the corner? How's long-term look for your team?
Yeah, we feel good, Rick. We've got a nice nucleus of young players, made some moves in the off season that should be helpful, particularly up front where we feel we'll be bigger and stronger and better equipped defensively. So we like our nucleus. We like the team we put together. We're very fond of our new coach, Frank Vogel, who joins us after many years in Indiana. Feel that he's the right guy to fit in here. So there's a good positive feeling as we get ready to start the season on Wednesday night.
So perfect timing, and it's always great to talk with you. What are your plans for the next 80, 90 years or so, Pat Williams?
Well, I've got another book coming in February, Rick, so I've got to be around long enough to do that. We've got 17 grandchildren now that we're helping to get educated as well. So I'm probably going to need those years you just mentioned to get it all done. So I continue to pray for good health, and I've got plenty on my platter, that's for sure.
As usual, one of the NBA and sports most amazing statesmen, as well as someone that you can learn life lessons from. Thanks for listening to this edition of Keeping Score. I'm Rick Horrow. The producer of the show, Alex Cohen. Associate producer, Bethel Habte. Assistance provided by Tanner Simpkins and Carlos Waddick. And the executive editor of Reuters Digital, Dan Colarusso.